All right, let's just get right into it. The age-old debate, Mac versus Windows. It's a battle that never seems to end, right? But today, we're not just going to look at spec sheets. Nope. We're diving into a challenge from a creator who promised their audience, promised them 10 solid reasons why a Mac is just flat out better. So what are these 10 reasons? And more importantly, do they actually make sense? Let's dig in and see.
So, where did this all come from? Well, it all kicked off with a challenge from the folks over at the YouTube channel TechWiser. They basically said to their audience, hey, if you get this video to 10,000 likes, we'll give you the ultimate breakdown, the real case for why Macs are superior. And you can probably guess what happened. Their audience absolutely crushed that like button.
And this was the exact promise that got the ball rolling. What I find really interesting about this is that it's not about comparing raw numbers or technical specs. This is all coming from a place of personal, hands-on experience, Years of using both Macs and Windows machines. So, with that in mind, let's get into the 10 reasons they laid out.
Okay, so the first big chunk of their argument isn't even about the day-to-day stuff, the clicking and typing. It's bigger than that. It's about the whole experience of owning one, from the moment you open the box to the day you eventually sell it.
And their first point, it's all about build quality. They bring up this example of a recent HP laptop that, looked amazing in the pictures online, but when they actually got their hands on it, it felt kind of wobbly and flimsy. The core idea here is that with the Windows world being so huge and fragmented, there's just a ton of inconsistency. You can't always trust what you see online.
And this really gets at that feeling of what premium actually means. The source makes a great point. You can buy a really expensive Windows laptop. We're talking like $2,000 for a Lenovo. And what do you get? A bunch of stickers for the processor and graphics card plastered all over it. But a MacBook? It's just clean. Just the logo. It might seem like a small thing, but it says a lot about the whole design philosophy, doesn't it?
Look, it's not just about the feel of the machine. It's about whether it actually works. They talk about a Realme laptop where the trackpad started failing after only a few months, and a brand new Acer that was already having Wi-Fi and charging issues. The main point here is what they call mental peace. It's that confidence you get with a Mac, that when you take it out of the box, it's just gonna work. No drama.
All right, but what about when it's time to upgrade? What happens when you try to sell your old laptop? Well, the source did a really interesting real-world test. They put 2 laptops up for sale on OLX. One was a 2-year-old MacBook Air, and the other was a practically brand new 1-month-old Acer Windows laptop, both listed for what they were worth.
And the results? Honestly, they're kind of shocking. After just 24 hours, the 2-year-old MacBook was getting flooded with offers. And the Windows laptop that was basically new? Nothing. Silence. It's a pretty powerful example of how well Macs hold on to their value, which really makes you think about the long-term costs, doesn't it?
So that's the whole ownership side of things. But what about actually using the computer every single day? That's what we're jumping into next. We're going to shift away from the hardware itself and talk about the software and the ecosystem that you live in and day out.
And this is where the Apple ecosystem really shines. It's a huge, huge advantage. I mean, everything just talks to each other. You can take a call that comes to your iPhone right on your Mac. You can zap files back and forth instantly with AirDrop. You can even use your iPhone as a super high-quality webcam or control your iPad with your Mac's keyboard. It all just works. It's so seamless. Now, look, Windows and Android definitely have their own ecosystem stuff. That's fair. But the argument here is that it often feels, well, fragmented, a bit messy and inconsistent. Apple's big strength is that it's all one unified system. Everything is designed from the ground up to play nicely together.
And, sometimes it's the little things that make the biggest difference in your day. Like on a Mac, you just tap the spacebar on pretty much any file and boom, you get a preview. You don't need to buy or install extra software. Or Spotlight Search. It's instant, finds anything. And you can even do quick calculations with it, all without an internet connection. It's those small, smart features.
All right, let's circle back and look a little closer at the hardware itself. In this last section, we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of the design choices that can really make or break your daily experience with a laptop.
Being portable isn't just about how light the laptop is. It's also about all the junk you have to carry with it. The source points out how annoying those huge, clunky power bricks are that so many Windows laptops still use. MacBooks, they just have a simple, small Type-C charger. And what makes it even more confusing is that on some Windows laptops, not every Type-C port can even be used for charging. It's just a hassle.
And then we have to talk about battery life.
This has been a complete game changer since Apple started making their own chips. I mean, Apple Silicon is just ridiculously power efficient. That's why an M1 MacBook Air can literally last all day on one charge. And even after 2 years, the battery health is still great. Now, you compare that to a typical Windows laptop where you might be scrambling for an outlet after just a few hours. Yeah, you can see why this is a massive win for Mac.
Here's the detail you might not think about until it's too late. The speakers. The source points out that so many Windows laptops stick their speakers on the bottom. What happens? The sound gets all muffled and tinny. It's just a bad experience. Even on some really expensive models, the sound just doesn't compare to the clarity you get from a MacBook. It's one of those things that shows you how much they sweat the small stuff.
Okay, so we've talked build quality, resale value, the ecosystem, hardware details, but what about the very first thing you have to do? Actually buying the computer. The source argues this is the final and maybe even the biggest point of difference between the two.
I mean, let's be real for a second. Buying a Windows laptop can be an absolute nightmare. You're just hit with this avalanche of choices. Do I get an i3, i5, i7, a 10th gen, 11th gen, 12th gen, integrated or dedicated graphics? How much RAM? Which brand? It feels like you need to do a PhD just to buy a laptop, and it's so easy to get completely overwhelmed.
And then you look at Apple's way of doing things. It's the complete opposite. It's all about simplicity. You have a handful of clear options, and it's pretty easy to figure out which Mac is right for you without needing a degree in computer science. It's just a much less stressful, more straightforward process.
So, where do we land with all this? What's the final takeaway? Well, the source is pretty clear that there's no single right answer for everybody. If you're a hardcore gamer, or if you're on a really tight budget, a Windows machine is probably the way to go. But if what you really care about is a smooth, seamless experience, long-term value, and just getting work done without hassles, then a Mac starts to look like a really, really good option.
And in the end, it really all boils down to one question. When you think about long-term productivity and just peace of mind, is that premium price tag for a Mac actually worth it? That's the real question at the center of this whole debate. And honestly, you're the only one who can decide that for yourself.